Over the weekend, The Woman King debuted as the number one film in the country, earning 19 million at the box office and receiving high praise from moviegoers and movie critics. The movie is being heralded as a significant achievement of a black woman led historical drama set in the 18th century. Now, despite the film's groundbreaking success, some folks within the Black community are calling for a boycott. Yes, it was trending on Twitter over the weekend, boycott the Woman King. And I got all interested in it. Like, why are they boycotting this amazing movie that's produced by Viola Davis, who's like Black royalty? And when I started doing a little research and digging a little deeper, the controversy is over what some say the movie doesn't do or does do. Some say the movie glosses over a significant history of slavery. One of my guests this morning, Dr. Ana Lucia Araujo, a professor of history at Howard University, says the film misleads audiences who might know very little about African history. Dr. Treva Lindsay is here this morning. She's a professor of African American women's history at Ohio State. She says, not so fast. They both are joining me coming up next. And then at the end of the show, we're going to talk to our film critic, Reggie Ponder, to see what he has to say about The Woman King. Stay with us coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
The Woman King is directed by a beloved director, Gina Prince Bythewood. It's written by Maria Bello and Dana Stevens. And this movie portrays the ancient West African kingdom of Dahomey. And today, that's the Republic of Benin. This legendary movie is really about these female warriors, these warriors who are referred to by Europeans as Amazons. And this all-woman regiment is on a mission, some say, to rid this kingdom of its horrible past of slave trading. But some say that whole message about this kingdom's involvement with slave trading has been whitewashed, has been minimized, and that the movie needs to come clean about this kingdom's actual involvement in slavery and shipping millions of Africans to the U.S. and other countries during kind of the worst period in our country's history. So I have these two amazing professors on. Both are history professors, one at Ohio State, one at Howard University, and they kind of have opposite opinions about this. So we're going to have this woman-to-woman talk about this movie that is getting so much attention. And I would imagine that you, Anna, and you, Treva, are both big fans of Viola Davis and some of the other women that star in this movie, as well as the director. But I'll start with you, Anna. You wrote this it wasn't scathing, but it was critical, this article in Slate magazine where you said the movie softens the truth of the slave trade. Tell us why.
Yes. First of all, the movie is an excellent movie. I watched the movie twice. I was waiting for this movie. I've been studying Dahomey for almost 20 years that I did field work and research in the Republic of Benin, where the kingdom of Dahomey was. But the point is that, of course, Dahomey was deeply involved in the Atlantic slave trade, especially at the moment when it started expanding. Then they conquered the coast. And this was in the beginning of the 18th century. And this coincides more or less with the period when this all-female regiment emerged. And Dahomey continued then trading in enslaved Africans until the 1860s. Then the last non-slave ship that came to the United States in 1863 then left from Ouidah. There was the port of Dahomey that is the second busiest port during the era of the Atlantic slave trade after Rwanda. Then the film is excellent, but of course it's a movie, and the story in the movie then indeed portrays the Agogier, that are these women who were called by the Europeans as Amazons, as liberators of sorts, and also they depict one of the kings that was one pretty much the most the greatest supporter of the Atlantic slave trade, King Gezo. They depict him as being convinced to stop the Atlantic slave trade in a period that was pretty early for him, that is 1823. This is fiction, which is fine, but of course I am not a specialist of cinema. Then the last time I went to a movie theater was to watch Black Panther, but the idea as for us as historians is to use the movie with its inaccuracies that happens in all motion pictures, and use the movie to tell this story that for many Americans and also for Beninese, for Brazilians, is not something that is well known. Then this is why that piece. But of course, these pieces, they are crafted to attract audiences. Then they have sometimes to put an accent on what is wrong. But of course, as a historian, I'm not writing academic work saying of what is right and what is wrong. But the piece is a popular piece for popular audiences. Then it was necessary to bold a little bit more these arguments.
So, Anna, you wrote a book called Slavery in the Age of Memory, Engaging the Past. And obviously your work has centered around studying the slave trade and portraying accurately what happened during this period. But Treva, I guess I'm a little disturbed by the folks that, took to Twitter over the weekend and other social media platforms to call for the boycott of the movie under the premise that it was whitewashing slavery. What was your response to that? And do you think that's the way we should be thinking about this movie?
Absolutely not, is the simple response to that. And I think that campaign is both a combination of misogyny and misogynoir specifically. I think embedded within that as well is an anti-Africanness that is coming out of some of this, as well as the conversation and the refusal to grapple with complex and multi-layered history. And that's exactly what Anna's piece did, which I read as very critically generous and generative. Generative in the sense of, here's some history that's not in this film and that's inaccurate in this film. And also, this is an epic, right? That's the point of this film. I left this film feeling my body seen, feeling my skin tone and my sisters with darker skin tone seen, and as heroines in a film where white people have this percentage of the dialogue and are also featured very little, and that most of the dialogue is women speaking, is groundbreaking in Hollywood mainstream cinema, and that it was centered on a story that's about tenacity and resilience. If we think about those values as core to the film, that's really important. It also offers an opportunity as an educator to fill in those gaps, to correct the inaccuracies, because what it's showing you is pieces from the archive, pieces from historical truths. There are Africans who resisted the slave trade in the history. Was it the Dahomey and depicted in the way that it is in the film? That's no. However, I think it's important to think about where resistance existed in the transatlantic slave trade and still holding accountable the larger context of white supremacy, anti-Blackness, anti-Africanness, anti-womanness, misogyny, sexism, and patriarchy and capitalism, which are at the core of the transatlantic slave trade, and in many ways are thematically engaged in the film, even if in this historically fictional way.
But do you think, Treva, do you agree that the film whitewashes, minimizes, or inaccurately depicts what the kingdom of Dahomey did with respect to slavery? Because that's the critique. So all those things you said about how it celebrates Black women, dark-skinned women, the resilience of women. I don't think there's any disagreement about that. The controversy comes over how it depicts this kingdom's involvement with slavery. So where are you on just that narrow piece?
Absolutely. And I think that narrow piece is part of the boycott. I'm loath to believe that I'm of the mind that more of it is not about that depth of study that folks have done, like my esteemed colleague here. But looking at that specifically, as Anna noted, this is not the history of Dahomey, right? In there are figures that are present. There are moments that are present here. There are anachronisms that are here for sure. There are a lot of things that historically don't hold up to the test of the archive. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's not necessarily a critique that leads to a boycott as much as it does an opportunity to engage in education, in telling these complex stories of the transatlantic slave trade, and still centering Black voices, Black stories, African voices, more broadly in African stories, which is leads and creates a pathway for doing. I appreciate the conversation and debate, but the end being a boycott feels very disingenuous and absolutely eradicates the way that the film is grappling with how people in various kingdoms across the continent were engaged in the slave trade and the reasons that they were engaged.
So, Anna, I read that Viola Davis and her husband, who are the producers of this movie, engaged a historian much like you, a historian whose life's work, or a large part of his work, is dedicated to studying that region, West African, country, this Dahomey kingdom, and that he stood by the depiction. And again, recognizing that a lot of it is fictionalized. Of course, they acknowledge that it's fictionalized. So if you have a historian who's working with the producers, who's working with the directors, who's working with the actors, and they tell you it's fiction, I guess I'm wondering why the need to write an article and call out the quote unquote accurate history.
Yes, I don't know of any historian who advised the filmmaker and the people who produced the film. There is one scholar who then is familiar with the history of the Diagogier, but historians who studied that area and who studied the Atlantic slave trade in that area, as far as I do know, they were not involved in that. And in addition to that, as you know, sometimes historians, they advise in these movies, they give advice, and sometimes the advice is not followed. Then we have to consider that we are nothing if we measure ourselves regarding Hollywood. And another point, I've been also sharing on Twitter, especially, then a variety of books that have been then published over the past years, including, for example, one book that is Barracoon, that is the story of Cujo Lewis, who was this enslaved man who gave a testimony to Zora Neale Hurston. And no historian corroborates the idea that King Gezo ever attempted to end the Atlantic slave trade in 1823. I publish, then when I say I study, is not abstract. I conduct the research and publish the results of this research. And some of this research is even draws even from letters, from correspondence that these kings of Dahomey, they exchanged at the time of the Atlantic slave trade. For example, the predecessor of King Gezo, he was indeed removed from power by Gezo through a coup d'etat, and Gezo was helped by a Brazilian slave trade, Francisco Félix de Souza. This story is well known in Benin, and I think that this is also another element that you should take into account, because of course you are looking at all this from the perspective of the United States, but on the ground already 30 years ago, when the UNESCO Slave Route project was to be launched. It was launched there in Ouidah in 1994. There was a lot of debates among artists, intellectuals, politicians, because of these multiple groups that are still in place and who are not represented by this heritage of the kings of Dahomey, but they indeed represent those who were victimized by them. And I think here in particular, those who are descendants of the people in the region of the Mahi country in the north, and also, for example, people who are Yoruba speakers in a present-day city that is Ketu, that existed at the time and that was raided multiple times by Dahomey. Then all historians who did work in that area, they do not corroborate this idea.
Well, let me be clear. I'm not, and I'm asking my team to find me the name of this historian that's in this article that I read. I'm not suggesting that this historian said that the movie accurately depicts factually what happened in this kingdom. I was making the point that they had a historian that consulted on the movie, but they're very clear that certain aspects of this movie are fictionalized. So my real question is, if it's a movie for entertainment purposes, and if we know that it's fictionalized, why the need for any of us to set the record, quote unquote, straight? We're going to the movie to be entertained. We're not in your class. We're not in Treva's class. So I guess I'm feeling like we're singling out this movie to correct a history when the movie isn't trying to teach you history of the trans-African slave trade. It's trying to entertain you. And Viola Davis is saying she's trying to elevate Black women, show them in a different kind of movie, give them, a different spotlight. So we're getting caught up in the weeds of the history when the movie isn't a history lesson. This is on the History Channel. It's at the movies. So
yeah, I will respond to that and say, Areva. So I always look at these moments like an opportunity to learn. Historians get tapped in to talk about these things, to provide context for these things. I understand this film is an epic, but sadly, we do live in a deeply anti-intellectual culture that for many people, the movie, the trailer, even in some cases, becomes the text and becomes the narrative and becomes the historical truth. And so I think our job as historians is to provide context, to use this as an opportunity to have a larger conversation about the complexities of the transatlantic slave trade, to listen to amazing historians who do this work and who are engaging in this work in public spaces, not to say to not see the film, but to really use the film as a point of departure. Because I think it's important that we are seeing films that chronicle historical events, historical figures that are out in the public, which then does push people to go to bookshop.org and download books, articles, different things about these stories, wanting to learn more about this incredible army of women, or to learn about this king. Was he really like this? Did he really say that? And there are opportunities for that kind of learning to occur. And so I don't want to be unjust in saying that people don't read, but I do want to say that we do live in a culture where we often live in small bites of things, and the visual is really important.
What was that she just called us, Treva, anti-intellectual? Was that your phrase?
See that in a number of ways. And I just want us to deep study around these things. And I think this film absolutely provides an opportunity for us to do that. And I think Viola Davis and her husband, Gina Prince Blythewood, the folks behind this, are providing us with an incredible opportunity to do this kind of work and to amplify the work of my colleagues who do this deep, hard archival, ethnographic, and painstaking work of really mapping what the transatlantic slave trade was for various entities from various perspectives to the descendants of those who were disparately impacted by what's happening both on the continent and in the Americas more broadly. And I think that that's really important. And if this film gets us to have that conversation more honestly, I'm very excited about that. And we get to center Black women and see bodies we don't usually see, and see amazing epic fighting scenes that are featuring Black women on the screen. That's That's just icing on the cake.
Absolutely. So my team found this professor that I knew I read about. His name is Leonard Wachakon, and he's a professor of politics and international affairs at Princeton. And he's also an associate faculty in economics. He is finishing his own book containing biographies of more than 50 of the Agoge based on interviews of the descendants. So there was this Princeton trained professor, and he was actually born, I guess, a mile from the former place of where a lot of this took place. So again, Viola Davis and her husband didn't just, go on whatever was written by these two writers. They did have this Princeton trained professor who was a part of developing the story. And I guess, Anna, I will ask, do you think the attention about, again, the accuracy of this history? I hear what Treva is saying about the need for us to take what's on the film and then continue these conversations and get this accurate history. But I just wonder, would we be having this conversation if this wasn't Viola Davis, if this wasn't her husband, if it wasn't a Black director, if this wasn't a film made by Black people that has primarily been supported by Black people? Like, I don't know. I guess lessons on Star Wars or some of these other epic movies by white people.
Yes, this is wonderful. But as a historian, I am reading this movie the same way as I critique and comment a museum exhibition or a monument. For example, in 1987, there was a movie, Cobra Verde, by German filmmaker Werner Herzog. And that movie was also very inaccurate and also much more whitewashing because it was not a Black movie. But still, that movie was then an opportunity to engage these conversations and to redress, then to put the record straight regarding the long history of the Atlantic slave trade and slavery, and also to break with some of the stereotypes that we have about the trade. The movie, in some places, the movie highlights that. For example, regarding the Amazons or Agoge themselves, many of them were indeed women who were captured during these wars. Then they were serving as they were forced to serve. Also, they later on in the 19th century, they resisted. They existed in smaller numbers, but they resisted the invasion of the French and French colonization. They were killed. Their belongings were transported to France. They were exhibited as animals in European human zoos. Then even their stories, the stories of these women that appear in the film as heroes, they were also victims. And I think that we have to provide this complexity because the story of the Atlantic slave trade is not only a story of good and bad guys. For example, Oyo Empire or Kingdom that appears in the movie, they are pretty much portrayed as the bad guys, as people who are dressed like Muslims, that were hiding horses, who were rapists. And this is also a distorted image that I believe that many individuals who live today in present-day Nigeria and who are Yoruba speakers, they do not see their ancestors in that way. And this is how historians should be using the movie to comment all of this and to detangle. Of course, it is entertainment, but our profession, we are there also to teach history through this kind of object. For example, my students at Howard University, they are not in Princeton. At Harvard University, my students, they want to know about this story, and they want to know a story that is accurate. Our then motto is truth and service. Then I think that people, they deserve also to get the truth, even if it is using a work of fiction, which is the case of this movie, as an excuse to have these debates. For example, African history. Many people do not have any interest in African history. And for us, I think that is a good opportunity to engage this history, engage African art, engage history of African women. But when you are doing so, we cannot only say, oh, this is wonderful. We have also to engage all this critically. And one person during the conference that I was during the weekend, a colleague who is a filmmaker, he was saying, we never saw so many white people being killed. This is the movie where the largest number of white people were killed by Black people in 2 hours. And we never had all of that. And we love that. But we have to move to another stage that is also to engage the movie historically.
Yeah, and I hear you. And again, I'm just trying to rack my brain around this notion again that this movie is not being targeted for this level of scrutiny because it is coming from this Black production company. Because there are other movies, movies about Marie Antoinette, The Last Samurai, The Patriot. I mean, there are tons of movies that purport to tell a story about a period in our history or world history. And I'm just trying to make sure that we're not giving this movie a level of scrutiny that we don't give to those movies that don't involve Black producers and Black actors. So I don't know. I'd have to go back and we'd have to do a historical check to make sure when The Patriot came out that everybody wasn't going to their history books and going to their history lessons to figure out was everything accurate versus fictionalized in that movie. I mean, Disney makes movies, yes. Pocahontas. I mean, there's so many movies that purport to tell a story about something. And I don't remember us, again, just having these massive history lessons about it. But let me ask you this, Treva, because I'm running out of time. Yep. Everybody's not going to go and, find out this accurate history. They're not going to read Anna's article. They're not sitting in a classroom at Howard University or a classroom at Ohio State. So how should they be watching this movie, knowing that based on what the both of you have said, there are some factual inaccuracies? That the majority of the people, hey, they're going to a movie, they're going home, going to work the next day. They are not checking for history, right? That's just the reality.
And I take your point, Areva, about the scrutiny. And I do think because it is so rare that we have this opportunity, that often Black films are tasked with doing so much more. There can be 20 stories probably about Marie Antoinette or various figures and be wildly inaccurate, and you won't get this level of scrutiny. We're also such a large part of social media culture and how we respond to things, right? Black Twitter is so active. So having this debate in certain ways is really interesting to watch unfold into that. But I would say for folks who are just going to watch it and it's entertaining, it's an epic. It's a well done movie. I think it's really compelling and tells a really incredible, rich story that points towards some historical facts and some historical moments and groups and figures that did exist. And I want you to dig deeper, but if you're not, please take it in as an epic that is meant to affirm. I think the lessons from it is just this resilience, this tenacity, sisterhood. There are all of these things that come out of that. And if you imagine it in that way or take it in and imbibe it in that way, I think there's a way to want to dig deeper on some of the other aspects that we've been discussing here today. And I wish people would be more critically generous with the artwork that we're producing that's seeking to grapple with, as Anna said, such dense and layered topics and really taking in a multitude of perspectives and to hoping to say this isn't the last piece of art that we will have that's about the transatlantic slave trade or about the Ogogie or about these kings or about other women who were not in this elite army who were also living during this time. I'm encouraged by that. And I want us to be encouraged with the art making that we see that's attempting to center the voices and perspectives and even if they're fantastical, standpoints of various historical actors who often are not on our screens.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, go enjoy the movie, love it for what it does do, but please don't heap these unrealistic expectations on this one movie. Viola Davis and her husband are not responsible for telling the complete history of Transamerica. slavery in the one movie that they've done, and now they're talking about a sequel to the movie. So maybe there'll be some other movies, and maybe they'll get to tell more stories. But I just hate that this weekend that should have been just one of intense celebration became this huge controversy over, was the slave trade being told accurately? And if you really feel that sincere about your history, go and make sure you register to vote and make sure you're voting for people who are not trying to prevent Black history from being taught in schools, because that's where kids are going to learn this history. They're not going to learn it at the movie theater. They're going to learn it in schools. And we know there's an effort afoot across this country to prevent schools from teaching accurate Black history and the history of slavery, the transatlantic, slave trade. So there are things that people can do other than taking to Twitter and griping. Okay.
Yes, but this has. I just want to add that this has been going for a while. Then I wrote the first chapter of my book on reparations discusses Dahomey, and that debate with a particular group of people on social media who have been trying to create these divisions has been there. Then this today is the movie, tomorrow is going to be something else. But me as a scholar, my interest is really Dahomey and the Atlantic slave trade, and the movie is an excuse to bring this history to light, not to engage or to rally with individuals who indeed do not understand what a movie is about, and also who do not understand what African history is, by trying to oppose Black Americans to African-born and Afro-Latinos and other groups of Black people who are part of the diaspora.
So Anna, tell us real quickly what that book is about reparations, because we have your book, Slavery in the Age of Memory, but you just mentioned a second book that you have. I want to make sure people know about.
Yes, my book is titled Reparations for Slavery and the Slave Trade, A Transnational and Comparative History. This is a book published in 2017. And the first chapter, in which I give an overview of the Atlantic slave trade, I address the problem of Dahomey, and I say very clearly that this idea that Africans sold off other Africans is a fallacy, because these groups, these kingdoms and states, they didn't see themselves at that time as fellow Africans. I think that we need to revisit all these discussions. People, they are not only interested about the movie, and it's because that it was made by Black people that they are attacking, because I think that there are many who are Black people who are attacking the movie. And in the past, we attacked movies such as the one on William Wilberforce that was totally whitewashed, this in 2007. But I think that
Anna, let me just tell you this. Unfortunately, lots of Black people, have grown up and been totally immersed in white supremacy culture. So being Black doesn't excuse, Black folks often engage in, acts of self-hatred and, demonstrate the conduct of white supremacy, because that's what we've been taught. And many of us have not figured out how to break out of that. So I'm not surprised that I think the Twitter boycott was started by some Black people. And I know I've seen tweets by Black people who have been very supportive of boycotting the movie. So I'm not suggesting that this was not in any way.
And also weaponized, and sometimes weaponized by individuals who are not real individuals as well, who are on Twitter just to create these divisions. And I call your attention, because you mentioned the elections, I call your attention that every time there is an election coming, if it is Kamala Harris or if it is reparations, that these debates, they become heated on Twitter. Be smart, you are being manipulated very often in this kind of debates that use the film as an excuse. But what is behind is there is an election in 2 months. Then let's use the film to create more division in a time when we do not need that.
Yes, and there's actually a report recently out that showed that Trump and team targeted like 3.5 million African-American voters in 2016. So we know, as you said, there are operatives who use social media to target African-Americans, to suppress the African-American vote, to sow these seeds of dissension. So we've got to be more discerning than that. Thank you so much, Professor Tell me your name again. I just keep messing it up.
Anna is good. Anna is good.
Professor Anna, Howard University, writing about these issues. You told us about your book in terms of reparations. You also have this amazing book called Slavery in the Age of Memory. Thank you so much. And Treva Lindsay, is always a pleasure to see you, my friend. You also have a book out that we have. I think it's called America Goddamn. We want to make sure. Okay, tell us. I had this debate with my producer. Is it Gotham or Goddamn?
It is America Goddamn. So it is definitely.
All right.
It is the riff on Nina Simone. So Mississippi Goddamn, America Goddamn.
Got it. Okay, Rashad. Goddamn. Thank you, ladies. Always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Your brilliance on this. Incredible. All right, Reggie, you got to follow these amazing women. Reggie Ponder is here. He's our movie critic. You can hear him on radio stations in Chicago. You can hear him on KBLA Talk 1580. He writes for The Voice Chicago. He has contributed to Variety and BET.com. And he was the first person I thought about when I saw this controversy. So, Reggie, what is going on? Why are people telling others to boycott this movie? I think you're on mute, Reggie.
There you go. So you do that all the time. First, Treva and Anna were great with that discussion. I think that we should always have a discussion about criticism is good. That's what I do. So I'm fine. I'm fine with criticism. My issue is what one of the things that Treva said about every African American movie, every Black movie has to be it. It holds the weight of the world, the weight of all of us, the hopes and dreams of everybody in that one movie. So we look to see, is there a dark-skinned person? Is there a light-skinned person? Is there a woman? Is there a man? Is the man with his wife? Do they have kids? I mean, we look at everything because
and all that's supposed to be in one movie.
It's supposed to be in one movie. And so I want to bring out this quote that Sidney Poitier told to Oprah, and he says it's always a challenge when you are carrying other people's dreams. It's always a challenge when you are carrying other people's dreams. And that is the weight of the world that Black cinema has, is it carries the everybody's dreams. What do we want to see? How do we want to see it? And I actually think that Professor Anna brings up a really interesting point. If it were my African ancestors portrayed in a negative way to be the bad people and the killers and rapists, I'd be upset about that. I'd be watching them say, oh, wait. So it is so tough. Even when you're making entertainment, you're going to probably,
piss off somebody.
You're probably going to piss somebody off. So I thought it was a great discussion, because really what I think films should do in this particular case, because it's an entertainment piece, is it should spur you to want to know more. That's what I think these types of films should do. If you want to really see something more like that's so accurate, then you need to go with Ken Burns. Find Ken Burns. Let's go to PBS, and bet your bottom dollar you're not going to watch it. Is that the majority?
That's what I'm like. This isn't the History Channel. This isn't a documentary on this kingdom, right? There could be, and somebody may make, or maybe it's already been made, I don't know about it, a documentary on these fighters, on this kingdom, on their involvement with slavery, and they can tell it, as accurately as they are capable of doing based on the historical record, based on the archives. But when you make a movie, you got one big job. And that's butts in the seats. Butts in the seats and ticket sales.
And this film cost $50 million to make. So I talk to you about this all the time, is that when you talk about it costs $50 million to make, we're not even talking about the advertising budget. Let's say that conservatively, because this movie from an advertising perspective has been advertised everywhere, but let's just say conservatively, they spent $20 million to advertise this film.
Okay.
That's $70 million. Now, the way in which the box office works is that it gets split. half of it goes to the theaters and half of it goes to the studio. So my rule of thumb is that you really want 3 times what you spent. So let's just go back down to the 50 million. That means that movie needs to make $150 million in order to break even. And then we have people talking about let's boycott. I agree with you.
Let's talk about that 19 million. Everybody is like praising and jumping up and down. The movie made 19 million. It was the number 1 movie. And I'm like, 19 million. When you think about Top Gun, Maverick, Tom Cruise, those movies make out the gate their first weekend, $50, $100 million. Why is a Black movie with Black royalty, which Viola Davis is not just Black royalty, she's Hollywood royalty. Why is that movie only making out the gate $19 million?
Well, I mean, there's so many reasons, Areva, and I wouldn't be able to really pinpoint it, but I'll conjecture on a few of those. One is that a lot of times when you have what you call a Black movie, the question is that for me if I'm not a Black person? And people ask that question all the time. Is this a movie I should go see? And generally, the answer is no, because I don't really see the universality in the story and the message in which it's bringing forth. How does that movie relate to my life? How does it enhance me from an entertainment perspective? And if it is one of the movies that shows killing white people the most that we've seen in a long time, do I really, 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 really want to go see that?
I don't know if Anna should have brought that up. I was like, okay, well, then we really ain't going to have white people, because I already read that only 23% of the movie goers that saw the movie were white, which also disappointed me, really hurt me. I was like, really, white people? Y'all couldn't go support Viola Davis?
That makes some sense to me as it relates to this kind of movie, because we're talking about empowerment. We're talking about the power of women. We're talking about Black people, dark-skinned
wait a minute, Reggie. If this is about the power of women, where are the allies?
Right, but we hear this all the time, is that we'll get into a whole different discussion when we talk about the women's movement and where Black women fall into that women's movement. We'll get into a whole different discussion when we talk about the LGBTQ movement and where Black people fall into that in that movement. And in many cases, you'll hear that people will say that they feel like they're still kind of on the outskirts of the movement of where everybody is going. So if that is the case, then it makes a lot of sense that, yeah, there might be some allies, but is this movie really for me? And the other thing is that Black people, when we go to movies, we always say to ourselves, do we want to see Black trauma or do we want to see Black joy? This one for us is probably closer. It's a lot of Black trauma in here, by the way, a lot of Black trauma.
Yeah.
From rape, from trying to find your place in the world. It's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of violence. It's just a lot of violence.
It's the violence. But there is some Black joy there.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, on the white side, is that's going to be traumatic. That is going to be traumatic, watching this and watching white folks get killed. Now, what I will say is that there's another aspect that I did like about this, though, is that while there's this criticism about the slave trade and whether or not Black folks, whether or not it's accurate, the fact that it does broach the subject that Black people or Africans were part of the slave trade is an important thing to talk about, because we kind of skirt that a lot of times. And the way I see it is that did we want to be slaves, or did we want to be, or we had the choice between being slaves or slave wranglers. Mm-hmm. And many people chose like, oh, well, hey, you trying to get my people, you know what? Maybe I'll help you get some folks. As long as it's not my people, we're going to be good. And I think that Anna kind of talked about that, about the reality of that there's these different countries and different tribes. And they were like, I have no allegiance to these different tribes that's in the country, but as long as you leave my people alone, we're going to be good. So anyway, I just want to go back to why I like this movie. It was powerful. Mm-hmm. It was so powerful watching these women command the screen and command their situations. Yes, They still were under a king. But the reason they called it the woman king was for a reason, because they were some bad, bad women. I walked out of that saying, Gina, you really put your foot in it. And I'm in love with all these other actresses. I'm just like, let me just interview them all. They were just fantastic.
Yeah, I just love listening to Viola Davis on her media tour talk about the training that she had to do. Being on that treadmill at a level 10, working out 5 hours a day some days, getting in the kind of physical, strength and the physical shape that she needed for the movie. But what do you think about this boycott? Do you think the boycott will draw more people to see the movie? Because now people may be interested, like, oh, wow, why are they boycotting? Let me go check it out. Does it have a negative or positive impact on the movie, you think?
I think overall it has a negative effect. I think that your question, and you kept trying to dig into it, why this film? This is a piece of entertainment that could give you a little education and hopefully spur you to go, but why this film? Why is it this film that you're against? And I think some people will probably buy into it because the whole Twitter sphere is very, very powerful.
Yeah. Let's go back to that money, Reggie. I'm sorry, go ahead, finish it.
I was going to go to the money. So that's really good. This weekend is going to really be the test to me. Is that we got 19 million. And so at 19 million, generally films kind of fall off at about 50%. So we will be looking at somewhere between 10 and maybe $12 million for this weekend coming up. And that will tell us if this film has legs or if this film is going to die off. What I'll say is that the cinema score for this was an A+. There's only one other movie this year that got a cinema score of A+, and that was the Tom Cruise movie. That was on cinema score. And then from Rotten Tomatoes, it's at 94% fresh. So it's very, very hopeful that this film is going to have some legs and it's going to move forward. But, if people are saying don't go see it, it depends on who those people are. Because if it's parents saying don't go see it, then that's a whole family not going.
How do you make up, Reggie? And again, 19 million for this kind of movie, for Black-led, epic movie, unfortunately, we have to say it's good. And again, I think we cannot gloss over the fact that this is not the same kind of money we see at a Tom Cruise movie. So there's no reason, because Viola Davis is as talented as Tom Cruise, hands down, no doubt about it. So how do you make 150 if you start at 19? Even in a good second weekend, you're going to drop, like you said, about half. That half could be 8 or 9, may not be that upper limit of 12. Where does this movie, is it in overseas? Is it, do you count when it goes to streaming? Does that money, does that somehow get factored in?
You count all that money in terms of your overall break even, but the big money usually comes through the theatrical release.
And let me just put it in context. Let me just say this, Reggie. I asked my producer, Tom Cruise, the Top Gun 2, $124 million. First weekend. It didn't drop a half in the second, 90 million.
I know, but let's not do that comparison. Let's do a better comparison. Let's do Black Panther.
Okay.
Black Panther is a better comparison. Tom Cruise is a box office draw that Viola Davis has never been. So that is not.
What did Black Panther gross in the first weekend?
So I don't have that number in front of me.
I'm going to have my producer pull that up. We'll get the Black Panther numbers. But I hear what you're saying. But wait a minute, let me just say this. I hear what you're saying, but I don't think we can divorce that from the larger conversation about misogyny and race in this country, because there is no reason that Viola Davis should not be the same kind of box office sensation that a Tom Cruise, at least in the same class. I mean, 19 to 124, you're not even in the same room.
Right.
Okay.
So
wait a minute. I got your number on Black Panther. You're going to be blown away.
It's it's over 100 million. I know.
It's 218 million over that President's Day holiday.
So my thought is that this would have made, based on what Black Panther did, that this would have made at least 50. That was my thought. So I don't want to talk about the white people that didn't go. I want to talk to the Black folks that didn't go. Is that this, in my opinion, should have made, after you saw what those women did in Black Panther, how strong and how important they were to the movie, the role in which they played, I would have expected that people would have flocked to this to say, oh my goodness, the women in Black Panther were phenomenal. So I was looking at somewhere at least 50, right? And so for me, this is a disappointment just from what Black Panther should have opened up the door for. When we get into the discussion, Areva, about who's a box office draw, misogyny, we need to be careful about that too. Because when we look at a Tom Cruise and a Denzel Washington does not do well at the box office. If you look at his average, and I don't have the number in front of me, but I have looked at this. If you look at his average movie, his gross per movie, it's not a high average. It would not compete with a Tom Cruise in itself. So Black folks in general, not just about women, Black folks in general, and when we start to do those comparisons, somebody who compares a little bit favorably would be a Morgan Freeman. His movies.
Yeah, no, I said with this, I didn't say just misogyny. I said misogyny and race. You can't.
Okay. I'm not listening. You see, I ain't listening. I'm not listening.
It's gender and race for sure. And then you are making the point that race trumps gender probably in this situation because Denzel, who is highly decorated, celebrated, I think the New York Times called him one of the best actors of all times, is not the draw at the box office as a Tom Cruise. But let's go back to your 50 million expectation. I didn't have that in mind, but when I heard that 19 million, I was so deflated. I was just crushed because I just knew that, and then I knew what was going to happen. I knew that it was going to get spun as a great thing. Like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is #1 box office hit. And we would have to gloss over the fact that this is woefully less than a movie like Black Panther, like Tom Cruise, like whatever the blockbuster movies are. And, accept that 19 million is a good thing for Black women. And that's just troubling. So why do you think Black people, because you said you want to forget about the 23% of the white people that went, and that means the 67% that didn't go. Why didn't more Black people go see it?
I am not sure. I'm wondering if there is this effect that's happening out of the pandemic, because there are not a lot of movies that have really crushed it at the box office this year. There are some, but is there this real effect that people will say, this is a movie that I could stream at home? Is that I know a lot of people are making that calculus. Not that I don't want to support Viola Davis, but is this one that I really need to rush in to see? So was there something that the marketing needs to do to say, hey, you need to see this on the big screen. This is going to be a big screen experience. I saw some figures that said a big percentage of people went and saw this on the IMAX. So I know that experience was really good. I saw it in the theater and it was fantastic. So it might be something to that regard, that whole thing of, is this a streaming movie or is this a movie that I should run out and go see? I think word of mouth, because it's a Cinema Score A+, and a Rotten Tomatoes 94%, word of mouth should really help this. And this weekend should be a good weekend. It should be a good weekend based upon the word of mouth and how people are going out. Now, I didn't hear about the boycott because I do some Twitter and all that stuff, but I don't do it like a lot of folks do. So I wonder if the boycott will have an impact. So I don't know, Areva, really why people didn't go see it. I think, though, it does go back to one of the things that you're talking about. Is, did Black men go see it? That would be a question that I would ask.
Good question.
Is that Black women go see it and made it where it is, but did Black men go? And I don't know if they delve deep into that. Is this something that Black men be like, oh, that's not really for me? That's this is about black women empowerment. That's cool. I'm glad they're doing it, but I got a golf game to go to this weekend.
Well, that's a really good point. So here's some other numbers that are interesting, and I'm not sure how we are to put them in the context of what happened with this movie. But Think Like a Man, remember that big movie, debuted at 33 million, and that was in 2012. But here's a number that's really shocking. 1995, Waiting to Exhale, Whitney Houston, right? $88 million.
And so
that's what it did total. So it did, not just that weekend, but that was the total on Waiting to Exhale, which says that black women can draw folks to the box office, right? So Waiting to Exhale, 1995, decades ago, but black people supported that movie, and I'm sure others did too, but obviously those numbers were driven by black women. So I don't know. And I guess the bigger question we have is Black Panther 2 is coming out. Are we to read into what that might do at the box office based on this?
I don't think so. I think that the hunger for Black Panther 2 is like off the chain. Mm-hmm. And particularly to see what's going to happen to T'Challa. How will they play that out? Who's coming back? I mean, there's so many questions right now. If you go on Black Twitter, everybody's like, don't replace T'Challa, replace him with this person, do that. I mean, so there's so much out there that I believe. I don't think it'll do 200 million at opening night, though. I think it'll be over 100, but I don't think it'll do 200 million. But I think it'll do fine. I think it'll do fine. I don't think that's the issue. I also think that I talked about this male thing that I was telling you is that it's a lot of it was male driven. It's a male driven film. It's an action film. Is a part of the Marvel franchise.
Yeah, so you have the Marvel piece.
So you got a part of that Marvel franchise.
You're going to have this nostalgic about Chadwick Boseman. So there are a lot of things that are going to drive people to see it for sure.
My comment that I want to make, though, is that the cool thing about this movie, whether it does really, really well after this or not, is that if they'll green light the second one. Because sometimes the first one really sets the stage.
And we're back to The Woman King. You're saying there are talks about a second one, right?
Right. So if there's really a second one, it could absolutely set the stage for a franchise. And that would be phenomenal.
Wow. That's a good point. Okay. So you are, I think, of the opinion that it's going to hit its mark. It'll take a little bit more time, but you think overall it will do this 100, 150. And if so, it could definitely be a franchise. Why not? That would be phenomenal, right? For Viola Davis, for Gina.
Yes, I don't think it'll do. I think it'll do somewhere at most 100. But even if it doesn't, and the studios feel, because saying you're number one, every movie does that. I want to say every movie, what they make 5 million or in a weekend, and they beat the other three by just $2. They will come out with an advertisement the next day saying we were the number one movie, number one comedy. So number one is nothing to scoff at. It is a marketing tool that is used throughout the industry. So The Woman King will be able to do that. And being able to say they were number one may help them get that next movie if there is something from a franchise. And I think the franchise could really be fictionalized, and we'll really get people talking about some stuff. They didn't do that, but then they'll move away from, the accuracies and just make them some great warriors, and we'll have some great time seeing these women warriors on the big screen. I enjoyed it. I am totally recommending this movie.
Final question. Oscar nomination and win. People are already, the minute a movie comes out, there's the Oscar buzz, right? Is this Oscar worthy, both the movie and the performances? And we saw our good friend Sheryl Lee Ralph get her Emmy Award after being, in this business for decades. So this may be, right, the year for Black women. So what do you think?
I think that this could have a number of people coming out of here with a nomination. Of course, they're going to look at Viola Davis as one, but then Tuso Mbedu was phenomenal in her role. And I'm going to tell you, Lashana Lynch and Sheila Atim, look, they supporting roles and how they weren't just warriors in this. This showed the depth of these characters, of these people, and they played these roles in a way that I think that they could get nominations. So there is a lot of talk right now about it, but memories are short. So we have 3 more months to go. Well, 4 more months to go. Well, 3 more months to go.
I can't imagine that either the movie itself doesn't end up on the movie best movie list. Definitely some of those women. I mean, it would be Oscar so white on steroids if one of those Black women coming out of this movie doesn't get nominated. All right, Reggie, thank you.
One last thing.
Go ahead.
Is that you got to remember that some Oscar voters don't watch all movies. Remember, we've talked about this before. So if this is one of those movies that people are thinking is not for me and they don't watch the movie, then it will not get nominated.
Okay, so that means it's all of our jobs to spread the word, to counter this boycott with our own hashtag, support Woman King, go see Viola, whatever it takes to make sure people know the importance of supporting this movie, because what's at stake and what can come as a result of this movie and other movies like this that center Black women and Black producers and Black directors. So if you want to see more Black movies, stop complaining, go read your history book, go take a history class, go watch the History Channel, sit your butt down in the seat, pay the ticket and watch this movie, and we'll have more Black movies. So there you have it, Reggie. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Sometimes you just got to tell people the real, right? Just bring them to them. If you care about history, Lord have mercy, enroll in Howard and take Anna's class, because Anna has all the historical facts for you. But this is not history. This is entertainment. And Viola and her husband had a job to do, and they did it very well. And I commend them, everybody that was associated with the movie. Thank you, my friend, for stopping by and helping us understand. And hopefully we get the word out for people to go see this movie. All right, I want to thank all my guests this morning. Again, I can't say it I can't say it too many times. If we want more Black movies, we have to support the Black movies that get greenlit. It is so hard in this business to get a movie, to get a project to the cinema, to your TV screens. And so when one gets there and it's done well and it involves first-class actors, people who are at the top of their game, we have to support these movies. That's how we see more of these movies. And no, one movie can't carry the entire race. It can't do everything that everyone wants. But when we have more movies, we can do more things. So don't burden this movie with all kinds of unrealistic expectations that we don't put on white movies, movies that center white people, movies about white stories. We don't do that to those movies. So please, please, please don't do this to the Woman King. And if you are a man, please don't not see this movie because it centers women versus Black Panther that centers men. And if you are going to see Black Panther 2, please make sure that you have gone to see The Woman King. All right, some words to goodbye. And they are the words that Reggie told us Sidney Poitier said to Oprah Winfrey. It's always a challenge when you are carrying other people's dreams. All right, people, we are up to that challenge. And we are going to carry the dreams of Viola and her husband, who are creating jobs and opportunities for Black people in Hollywood. Be safe out there. Remember, we're all in this together.